Hello everyone and welcome to today's Wild Rift video. In today's video, I'm going to be talking all things runes. We're going to talk about each and every single rune, what they do and how they benefit the champions that you play, what runes you should be completely avoiding, and also some situational runes, which are sometimes good in some scenarios and maybe not so good in some other scenarios. We're going to do this in a tier list format, but think of this more of like maybe a podcast of me just talking about runes in general and what I think some runes should be changed into or runes that should be buffed or nerfed. But I put it in a tier list format because there are some runes that you should just avoid entirely. So let's go into it. First up, we have the Keystones. Every Keystone is pretty good. I would say there's maybe some Keystones in the B tier that are maybe a bit more situational, to be fair. Especially runes like Airy and Empowerment. Empowerment especially, not very good on a lot of champions. Most of the time you want the extra consistent damage from runes like Conqueror and Lethal Tempo. Empowerment being one of the weaker of the runes that like to deal damage. Same with Airy as well. Most of the time with Airy, you're using these on enchanter supports because of the shielding. However, the damage element of Airy is not really up there. And again, there are some other runes that you'd rather take instead for damage like Arcane Comet, Electrocute, and First Strike. First up in the S tier though, Glacial Augment. I think Glacial Augment is still a lot better right now than Aftershock. The utility that you get from Glacial Augments with the Rays of Slow, and also a lot of people don't know, but when you proc Glacial Augment, you actually reduce the enemy's damage. So reducing the enemy's damage means that when you're trading, especially like 2v2 in a bot lane, or whether you're playing as a jungler and you're looking to gank lanes, you proc them Rays of Slows, you're going to be reducing damage from enemy champions. So that means that you're most of the time going to be winning a lot of trades. Whereas Aftershock is more of like a self buff in a way, where you gain more stats and you gain a little bit of extra damage. Whereas Glacial Augment is just good for every single scenario. So again, whether you're playing like a tank in the jungle, or maybe you're playing a tank in the support role, Glacial Augment is a great option. The only time I would take Aftershock is maybe more aggressive tank junglers like a Mumu and Rammus that are always going to be standing close to enemy champions. Whether it's a Mumu with his bandage toss, Rammus with his rolling ball and his taunt, every single time they proc Aftershock, they're guaranteed to do the damage every single time. Whereas some other champions, like maybe Nunu, for example, some champions can escape from that. So, you know, some champions can escape after you land the crowd control. So you'd rather go for something like Glacial Augment. So again, you get you deal the extra bit of reduced damage to enemy champions, and also you get the Razor Slow. Grasp the Undying went through a bit of an interesting change where they basically got rid of the AD and AP scaling Grasp the Undying, but now you gain more stacks and you can also heal more health. So now the rune only scales with how much HP you have. So it's very, very strong on tanks now. Very, very powerful on tanks like Ornn, Malphite, any sort of tanks like that. It's very, very powerful. However, it's become a little bit weaker on bruisers, since bruisers most of the time like to build a mixture of damage and health items. They don't really build a lot of health items in general, but there are some bruisers that still want to go for Grasp the Undying just because of the extra bonus damage that you get when you stay in combat for quite some time. Champion like Wukong, for example, is a very good example where you can stay in combat for a few seconds, auto attack in minion waves, and then when Grasp the Undying is up, you use your first ability and use this to poke down enemy champions. Again, this works. You can use the same on someone like Camille as well. Again, staying in combat for a few seconds, use the first part of your first ability, and then the second part of your first ability, that empowered auto attack, you can then proc Grasp, again dealing the extra damage. You still build some health items on bruisers, Sterox Gauge, Divine Sunderer, Trinity Force. These items are still very good, but I think most of the time now you only really build Grasp the Undying on tanks, and on these bruisers now you build either like Fleet Footwork, Conqueror, or some other runes instead. Lethal Tempo, even after the nerf that happened recently, which you don't gain as much attack speed, and the range, I believe, has also been reduced. It's still a very, very strong rune. Most, if not all, AD carries still take Lethal Tempo. And even though the range got reduced, the range in general, the extra range that you're getting is just so powerful. The attack speed also means that you can adjust your build, meaning that you don't need to build items like maybe Phantom Dancer or even Magnetic Blaster. You can deal more damage because the extra range is giving you the spacing that you need against some of these really strong bruisers or tanks. But in general, a lot of attack speed, a lot of scaling attack speed. Again, it benefits you in the early game as well when you're going for these long out trades. It's not very good for burst damage. However, most of the time with AD carries, you're there for auto attacking and consistently auto attacking over time, which is again, you know, what you need to do as an AD carry is scale later on into fights rather than doing quick burst damage straight away. There's always the question between First Strike and Aftershock, First Strike and Electrocute, sorry, not Aftershock. The way that I see it is with First Strike, it's very good now after the buff that happened to it. I believe you now get more base gold and the true damage also went up. It was in B tier before and Electrocute was better than First Strike, but with this buff, First Strike has come back into it. The way that you need to see these two runes is, am I going to be guaranteeing that I am the first person to deal damage? The downside to First Strike is sometimes the rune can be completely useless if you're not the first person dealing damage. Because if you're not, then the rune's going to go on cooldown. So when you're walking up, when you're trading towards enemy champions, you think of mid laners like Victor, for example. If you're against melee champions, then First Strike is great. You can go for First Strike. You'll be able to use your third ability to poke champions, to deal the true damage, and to also collect the extra gold throughout the game. However, sometimes there might be situations where you're against other mages who are going to be poking more than you and who are maybe going to have longer range than you. So that means if they deal damage before you and you're trading back towards them, you're not getting the bonus true damage. You're not getting the extra gold. And over time, the rune becomes weaker and weaker. You start with the scaling of First Strike, which is also very great as well. You know, the gold that you collect over time is great because you can buy more items. Also, the true damage will scale better into late game because it you do the 8% bonus true damage. So the more damage that you have, the more true damage you'll have because it will scale as you're building more items and as you're dealing more damage. So the scaling of First Strike is there. Again, you just have to think about, am I going to be the first person to deal damage? You think of other assassins as well. Talon, Evelyn, Kha'Zix. These are all champions that can get to the backline and can turn invisible and can be the first person to deal damage because that invisibility benefits them. Electrocute, though, is still a very good alternative to First Strike. Again, champions that maybe are not going to be dealing a lot of damage. A very good example of this is like Fizz or even Echo, even though Echo really goes with Fleet Footwork mid, which I'll talk about in a second. But Electrocute is an alternative to First Strike, which is a lot more reliable. It doesn't matter about who deals the first damage and who does what. As long as you are basic attacking or using abilities to generate stacks on an enemy champion, you apply that 3 times, you do that burst of damage. It used to be very weak in the late game. That's why Electrocute was never really good, but they buffed it quite a lot recently, and the late game damage now is pretty decent. It scales pretty well now into the mid and late game. So if you think that the enemy team has a lot of range, or if you feel like you're playing a champion that doesn't have a chance to be able to jump in and deal damage first, then you can go for Electrocute instead as an alternative to still deal bonus damage with your combos. Fleet Footwork is very, very powerful after the changes that happened where you get 100% attack speed when you proc Fleet Footwork. So this means that you can do 2 auto attacks in a short amount of time. This has given laners a lot more power and a lot more survivability in general. Champions like Camille is benefiting a lot from Fleet Footwork. Jax as well with his empowered auto attack on his second ability, and also being able to auto attack 3 times to get the empowered auto attack from his ultimate. There are a lot of champions that benefit a lot from Fleet Footwork. Echo as well, proccing his passive is great. Graves, you can get the extra bit of attack speed. Fizz as well, if you want to quickly get that empowered auto attack again from your second ability. So there are a lot of champions that benefit from Fleet Footwork. Unfortunately, ADCs don't really take Fleet Footwork, which is why Lethal Tempo is above Fleet Footwork, because Lethal Tempo is still the prime rune for AD carries and just prime rune in general. You know, as I mentioned, every single AD carry takes it. No one really takes Fleet Footwork on these sort of champions, but Fleet Footwork is still very good, and very good on some champions that can do a lot of damage over time. Conqueror in general is still very good. You know, the adaptive damage that you get, the Omnivamp that you get as well. I get a very solid rune that is pretty much good on every champion, to be fair. There's never going to be a scenario where Conqueror is bad unless they nerf the rune to the ground. There are so many different champions that have many ways to stack up Conqueror, do a bunch of damage, and get the healing, benefit a lot from the Omnivamp and the healing that you're able to get. Arcane Comet got a bit of a change in patch 6.0 where you don't do as much damage in the early game, but the scaling damage is now a lot more. So it's great for champions that want to use their poke to their advantage in the early game. Morgana, Lux, Zyra, Aurelion Sol. These are champions that have free reign and allowed to poke champions in the early game and proc Arcane Comet. And if these Arcane Comets land on champions, then your damage is going to be scaling. The more Arcane Comets you hit, the more damage you're going to be dealing later on. So it's really good for these scaling mages that have this reliable source of proccing Arcane Comet in the early game and need that maybe a little bit of extra damage and a little bit of scaling when it comes to the mid and late game. So overall, very strong rune. B tier in general, like I said, they're more like situational runes, as I briefly mentioned at the start. Summon Area is very good as a defensive rune where you can build it on enchanter supports. Milio, Lulu, Nami, you know, I keep going on and it will still be the same. Soraka, Sona, all these champions are great because Area is good for a little bit of poke damage they can deal, but also it's very good when you're healing and shielding because it gives you that extra bonus. Unfortunately, Wild Rift is in a situation right now where Area isn't good as an offensive rune. So some players on like PC League, for example, for Victor, like to run Area because of that extra guaranteed damage that you get in the early game, and you can use that to benefit your shielding. But unfortunately, it doesn't really do too much at the moment. You know, the damage is not really there. You don't really benefit from any of the damage from Area, so that's why Area in general is a bit weaker compared to the other ones. Again, very good maybe as a supportive rune, but other than that, not really. Empowerment, there's not really a lot of champions that actually take empowerment. Kindred is maybe one of them. Lucian could also be another. There's maybe some other champions that I can't really think of off the top of my head, but in general, empowerment is just not that strong, unfortunately. If we had runes like if we had items like Kraken Slayer as well, and you can combo that with empowerment, that can be very, very strong. But unfortunately, at the moment, we don't have Kraken Slayer as an item. So yeah, empowerment, very situational and only on some champions that can quickly use the empowerment burst damage to their advantage. As I mentioned, Aftershock just weaker than Glacial Augment right now. The downside is that Aftershock is very difficult to guarantee that you're going to be dealing the extra shockwave damage. The extra resistance is very nice for some champions and it can benefit you a lot. But in general, guaranteeing the damage on top of that is very, very difficult. This is where Glacial Augment becomes a lot more reliable, and Aftershocks is more of a situational rune where you really want to use it on champions that can benefit from things like taunts and stuns and anything else that can make sure that you can actually deal with the extra damage, basically. So yeah, a bit of a situational rune, but still can be pretty good. Phase Rush is a bit of a weird one. There are some really cool, unique interactions with Phase Rush with some champions. Alistar is a good example where you gain extra movement speed so you can proc the stun on your third ability. Varus loves the cooldown reduction and the movement speed to be a bit more mobile during team fights. Darius likes the movement speed as well to make sure that he stays in range to stack up his bleed and use his ultimate. There are some champions that can use this rune very well. But again, more of a situational rune. These other champions can still take other runes instead. Darius can take Conqueror and play with Ghost and Flash, for example. Varus can take First Strike and just benefit from the poke damage. And yeah, the other champions as well. So yeah, in general, Phase Rush is decent, but unfortunately just, again, not as strong as some of the other runes. But as I mentioned at the start, you know, these are all just my opinion, and it's very difficult to put runes in a tier list. I feel like it's good just to give you an overview of what I think about all the runes and where they're standing at the moment. Domination tree, I have Domination, Inspiration, Precision, and Resolve. Domination tree is, I would say, the weakest out of all four of these minor rune sections. Inspiration is pretty decent. If I was to put it in any order, it would probably be Resolve, Precision, Inspiration, Domination. Wow, it's actually in that order, which is kind of crazy. Or maybe precision can be better than resolve. That's a bit situational. But in general, domination is just the weakest set of runes. And I'll explain why you kind of want to avoid domination most of the time. Empowered attack is probably the only saving grace really right now for the domination tree. The extra auto attack damage you can deal is very nice on some champions that can benefit a lot from auto attacks. And just guaranteeing the auto attacks every single time. You think of champions like Twisted Fates, Ari, you know, champions that benefit a lot from auto attacks, but also can guarantee auto attacks as well. So like Ari, you can charm, use your other abilities and auto attack in between using this. And also Ari can benefit from some of the other runes as well in the domination tree. Echo can be another one that could be pretty good. Great, Gragas as well. But again, these champions would rather take other runes instead. But there are a few champions that can benefit from empowered attack and, you know, still be very powerful. Scorch for a little bit of poke damage during the early game is nice, but unfortunately it just doesn't scale and you don't really feel the damage in the late game and the mid game. And Wild Rift is a game right now where it's very difficult to get advantages during the laning phase because of the durability patch. So you taking a rune that doesn't really benefit you that much in the mid and late game is very, very difficult right now. It's very difficult to take some of these early game aggressive runes that, hey, I can play aggressive during the early game, get an advantage and win the game. Fortunately, it doesn't really work like that right now. Zombie Ward is still pretty decent. You can actually take these on some supports since there is a lot of AD carries and supports that like to ward in the bot lane. If you get priority in the bot lane, you can use the Zombie Ward to your advantage. You can gain that little bit of extra ability power to help you out. Whether you're playing, I don't know, Rakan or someone like that, the extra ability power can be super beneficial to you. Or even if you're roaming around as a jungler, you know, taking Zombie Wards can be quite nice. But again, on the downside is that not a lot of people, sometimes not a lot of people ward. So there might be some games where you take a lot of wards down and you gain a huge amount of bonuses. And there'll be other games where no one wards at all and you get no bonuses at all. So again, a bit of a hit or miss rune that sometimes can benefit you, sometimes cannot. Sudden Impact got a lot weaker this patch. It used to be an S tier rune, and honestly, the main reason why people were taking the Domination rune was because of Sudden Impact and how powerful Sudden Impact was before. The extra armor pen or magic pen that you was able to get before was great, but now you just deal true damage, and to be honest, the true damage is not even great. The cooldown went up as well, and overall it's a lot less reliable, and it's just not as strong as what it was before, which is why, in my opinion, Domination is the weakest tree. There are some runes that you can take which are maybe pretty decent, but overall it's just not that great. And again, with sudden impact being nerfed, that means the domination tree comes down even more. Eyeball Collector, again, if you can get some takedowns, whether that's kills or assists, it can be great. If you don't, then it can be a downside, but Eyeball Collector can be a good option if you don't want to risk Zombie Ward. Ingenious Hunter is actually pretty unique and pretty cool on some champions. If you use it with some support items. Remember, this is item ability haste, so it works with items like Redemption, Protector's Vow, Guardian Angel, Crown Guard, Edge of Night. These items that have cooldowns, it will reduce them cooldowns. So again, you can take this on someone like Brom that really loves Protector's Vow, Redemption to get the item ability haste, so you're shielding procs more often and you're healing procs more often. So there are some really, really cool interactions with Ingenious Hunter, but again, that's all it's really for. Cool, unique interactions. Is it really strong? No, not really. Does it give you a benefit compared to other runes? No, not really. That's why I sit in B tier, which is like the okay tier sort of thing. So it's still good in some scenarios, but most time it's not that great. Cheap Shot as well. Yeah, the true damage, again, you can see by the numbers itself, 10 to 45 true damage. Even in the early game, it's not that powerful when it doesn't scale that well into the late game. Can be good if you can hit some reliable crowd control, but other than that, it's not that good. Mark of the Week is struggling right now because of the way that the rune works. It gives you bonus adaptive damage, which means if champions have armor and magic resist, the damage of Mark of the Week will be reduced. So you basically just make them weak, they take more damage, but if they have armor and magic resist, depending on the certain damage that you're dealing, which most of the time is going to be magic damage, if they have magic resist, then Mark of the Week is not going to do as much damage and it's not going to reach its full potential, which is kind of downside right now of Mark of the Week. Psychic Wave, again, again, a very situational rune where you have to try and mix your auto attacks and abilities, which the only two champions that I can really think of that can benefit from this rune is Twisted Fate and Ari, which again, both champions can also benefit from Empowered Attack, which is two of the only champions that can maybe still run these runes and can really benefit from these runes, but still overall it's not that great. Again, more of the unique side, you know, it doesn't really give you a reliable amount of damage. You have to auto attack, then use an ability, or use an ability, then auto attack. And even then the damage is not that great and it can kind of struggle a little bit. Shield Bash is decent on champions that can maybe get a shielding. To be fair, I don't know why this is in the Domination tree. This should actually be in the Resolve tree like it is on PC League. I think it would really benefit some champions if this was in the Resolve tree. Imagine champions like Shen, Malphite, etc. But since it's in the Domination tree, you don't really have any benefit. Like, you're taking Shield Bash as a tank like Shen and Malphite, but then what are the other two runes that you take with Shen? Because Shield Bash is in the first tree, then the second tree you have either Cheap Shot, Mark the Weak, or another one which I can't remember. There's another one. Oh, Empowered Auto Attack. And then in the last tree you have Ingenious Hunter, Zombie Ward, Eyeball Collector. How do you take any of these as a tank? It's so much better to just go Resolve tree and get more tank stats. So yeah, that's why Shield Bash is very low. If they move Shield Bash to Resolve tree, it could be a lot better, especially if it's in like the first row to replace runes like Nullifying Orb or even Courage of the Colossus, which is basically a better version of Shield Bash. But yeah. Inspiration is pretty cool and unique. I kind of like the Inspiration tree. I think that it's just a lot more reliable in a way, and also the Inspiration tree can just farm you a lot of gold and give you a lot more utility in general. I think these runes are very nice, even though Inspiration in general doesn't give you any damage stats at all, which is why in my opinion it's still weaker than Precision and Resolve tree, because Inspiration is more to do with utility and maybe farming gold, giving you more movement speed, giving you dashes, all this sort of stuff. It's more to do with utility than damage and tank stats. So yes, it's not up there with Precision and Resolve because these actually give you damage and tank stats, but it's still cool in some scenarios. Transcendence is great. Ability haste in general is very underrated on Wild Rift and give you a lot of benefit. You know, Transcendence on enchanter supports, on mages, any sort of champion that loves ability haste and wants to use their abilities more often, Transcendence is an excellent rune to go. The whole combo with Sweet Tooth and Ixtali Seedjar is still a thing. Sweet Tooth being able to increase your honey fruit healing, which means that every single time you pick up honey fruit, you're going to be getting 15 gold. And Ixtali Seedjar, when you use a fruit after 60 seconds in the game, you can then reuse that fruit again. So you can farm like 60 gold every single time. I've been seeing people with this combo get like 1,000 to 2,000 gold every single game, which is a lot if you think about it. That's about as much as what you can get. And that's enough to buy like a tier 2, maybe even 2 tier 2 items, which allows you to get to your power spike sooner. So again, it's more of a trade of, do you want stats from the runes itself, or do you want stats from items in terms of gold? Again, this is pretty good on champions like Orianna. Aurelian Soul could also benefit with this super well. Just any champions in general, especially mages in the mid lane, which nothing really happens in the early game with mages. You know, most of the time with mages, you're scaling and you're trying to get items like Luden's Infinity Orb, Awakened Soul Stealer, Death Cap. You want to get your items as soon as possible, so it gives you that acceleration to get to that point. So these two runes are very good. Hextech Flash Traption, even though you don't have the instant big dash anymore when you tap the ability, you don't have the big flash. Hex Flash in general is just still very powerful, especially on support. You can use this on junglers. You can use this on pretty much any champion. You can even still use this on AD carries if you want to, if you struggle with mobility. That extra dash that you can get to get away to safety or to dash forward to do a bit of engaging. Again, really good on champions like Blitzcrank. Trying to think of other ones. Alistar, champions like that. Any sort of champions that can benefit from dashes and reducing the distance between yourself and enemy champions. Nimbus Cloak, really big burst of movement speed. Again, can be really good for AD carries if you want that big burst of movement speed. It can be really good on champions like Darius, Rammus. Again, any of these sort of champions that can use their summoner spells to their advantage, especially champions with Ghost. Singed as well is also another good scenario where Nimbus Cloak is very good. any champions that just want some movement speed in general, this rune's very good for. And also it's very good just as a standard rune as well. Pretty good to get a bit of extra movement speed. Mana flow band, you don't really need the mana in this game. I might even put this rune lower, to be fair. It might even be C tier right now. Mana flow band, I might have to move this down, but mana flow band, just, you don't need the 300 extra mana. If you preserve your mana correctly, you won't struggle at all during the early game. And then after 12 minutes in the game, once the blue buff gets taken by anyone on your team, everyone gets blue buff. So that 300 mana that you got from your rune is completely wasted. So in general, mana flow band is just not very great. The 300 mana will not benefit you at all if you're playing mid lane. If you need mana, just build Luna's Echo. That'd be more than enough mana to survive until 12 minutes in the game. If you're playing bot lane supports, you know, you don't need the mana anyway because you're building so many mana items with harmonics, stuff flowing water, mana boots, etc. And also that's another thing, mana boots being in the game, giving you mana regeneration is another reason why mana flow band is just not very good. Pathfinder is only situational on some champions that benefits from the bonus movement speed in the river. Nuno Ramos are the two that I can think of off the top of my head. They're the only really two champions that could do it. The only other scenario that you can use Pathfinder is engaged supports. So roaming supports like Alistar Blitzcrank again, which I'll mention again. These are two supports that can roam around, try and gank in the mid lane, maybe want to roam top lane for Rift Herald, anything like that. So giving you extra movement speed to get to places quicker is quite nice. Demolish can be really good if you can win the early laning phase, especially if you're playing tanks as well, since Demolish scales more with how much HP you have. If you're playing as someone like Garen, Ornn, Malphite, and you're able to win the early game, win the early laning phase, maybe get an early gank, you can guarantee yourself 1 or 2 plates with Demolish every single time, which is a free 150 gold in the bank. And that 150 gold soon scales and it soon gets more because the enemies are going to be losing minions, you're going to be getting more minions and also more gold from Demolish. So overall it is good, but again, you'd rather have other runes to give you more damage stats in general. And C tier, we still have craft finding and futures market. I just personally think both these runes should be removed. I don't see any benefit from these 2 runes at all. You're not gaining any bonuses from these runes. It doesn't help you at all in any way. Sorry. Oh god, sorry. That's what happens when I talk for a long time. You don't really get any benefit from these 2 runes. They don't really help you out at all. Yeah, in general, you'd much rather take any one of these runes in the inspiration tree rather than these 2. They cooked with these like a year ago. I think they brought these out a year ago, but I think both of these should be removed and replaced for some more cooking instead. Like what they did with Stally Sieger, I think it's great. The way they moved this from an item that was completely useless into a rune. This is great. It has cool synergy with Sweet Tooth. Really, really cool. But item crafter in the futures market, not that great. As I mentioned, Precision Tree is very, very strong right now. There are many strong runes that you can take in the Precision Tree, bar one of them, which is Last Stand. S tier, Legend Bloodline, Legend Alacrity. This is really situational depending on what champion you're playing and also what role you're playing. If you're a champion that needs a lot of healing, I can think of a few champions that maybe want healing, like Hecarim jungle, for example. Maybe you have a champion that has already enough attack speed and you'd rather have the healing instead. Legend Bloodline is very, very good. But overall, Legend Alacrity does get picked over Legend Bloodline because the attack speed is a lot more beneficial than the Omnivamp, because you get up to 20% bonus attack speed, which is great. All you have to do is just take down monsters, enemy champions, minions, which most of the time you do like in a jungle. So Legend Alacrity can be used again on like champions like Viego, Vi, any sort of aggressive bruisers, Jarvan as well. And the extra attack speed will also help you clear through the jungle quicker. So you're gaining benefits in team fights with the attack speed, but you're also gaining benefits when clearing through the jungle. And again, the same with AD carries. On here, AD carries that like to build items like Terminus, Wit's End, always go for a Legend Alacrity for the extra attack speed. But again, Bloodline is a really, really good option if you want the healing instead, if you want the survivability. Giant Slayer, there are a lot of items in the game that give you HP, whether there's mid lane champions that get HP from items like, I'm pretty sure Awakened Soul Stealer does. I don't know why I can't think of any other mid lane items. Rod of Ages, Rift Maker. There are a lot of mid lane mage items that build HP. Of course, top laners, whether you're playing against tanks or bruisers, they both build HP. Bruisers in the jungle, tanks in the jungle build HP. supports build a HP, Enchanter supports build HP. You have Ardent Sensor, Starflow Water, Protector's Vow, Redemption, all build HP. Basically, most of the time, every single champion builds some HP. So you are going to be getting a lot of benefit with Giant Slayer. The only champions that don't build HP are assassins, and even then sometimes they build like Edge of Night, which is a little bit of HP. So 99% of the time, if you're running the precision tree, you always want to take Giant Slayer. Again, it really depends on the enemy team comp and what they go, but the amount of benefit that you get from Giant Slayer is a lot more than Coup de Grace and Last Stand. Coup de Grace is a good alternative if you're not against a lot of tanks and if you're against a lot of assassins, since these assassins are going to get lower on health much quicker, so you'll benefit a lot more from that bonus adaptive damage from Coup de Grace. But again, Giant Slayer is normally the alternative. Brutal is still decent. The sad thing about Brutal is that they nerfed the early game damage of Brutal, but again, they compensated with buffing the late game damage, so you deal a little bit of extra auto attack damage in the late game now with Brutal, but overall it's still good. You still want to take this on pretty much every single AD carry. Most bruisers in the top lane also want to take this as well to try and get a benefit in the early game. Camille, Jax, Wukong, any champions that like to auto attack to gain that little bit of advantage in the early game, it's great. Really, really strong. B tier Gathering Storm, a little bit slower than Brutal. The AD version of Gathering Storm is not really great. That's why you see Brutal a lot more than Gathering Storm on AD champions, because you benefit more from the auto attack damage from Brutal rather than the 2, 5, 9, 14 AD you get from Gathering Storm. However, with AP champions, you get a lot more benefit. You get a lot more power with Gathering Storm. As you can see, double every single time of what the AD counterpart is. So as the AD keeps racking up, the AP racks up as well. And again, this is adaptive damage. So this means depending on how much AD and AP you have, you'll get what gets given to you. So say you're a champion that, I don't know, this is a very rare scenarios, but say for example, you're a champion that has 100 AD and 150 AP, you'll get the AP. So it's whatever stat you have more of. If you have more AD, you get AD. If you have more AP, you'll get AP. So if you're playing mages, Gathering Storm's great. If you're playing AD champions, then Brutal is better. Legend Tenacity is more of a situational rune, but it is still very powerful. You can still use this to reduce the crowd control from enemy champions. It gives you tenacity and also slow resist, which build up over time. Again, more of a situational rune. The problem is that this is in the same tree as Legend Alacrity and Legend Bloodline, since both of these gives you such huge benefits. That's why Legend Tenacity is down here, but it's still a really good option. Triumph for the extra healing, restore health is really good for reset champions. Katarina, Ambessa, even champions like Jarvan and Vi that want to jump into the backline and do a bunch of damage in a short amount of time. Triumph can be very good. But again, even with them champions, you rather go for some other runes instead of Triumph. You know, maybe you want to go for Gathering Storm for the extra AD, or even Brutal for them champions for the extra auto attack damage. But Triumph can be a very good option if you want to go down the route of jumping into the backline, trying to get takedowns, and every single time you get a takedown, you restore health and mana. And Last Stand, unfortunately, the weakest at the moment in the precision tree. You never take this at all in any scenario, really. The bonus damage that you get is only 5 to 11%. You barely go below 60% health most of the time, unless you're playing. There are very rare scenarios that you take Last Stand, which is champions like Dr. Mundo, who can gain a lot of health and a lot of healing when they're low on health. And also, you being below 60% health doesn't actually mean you're low in health, because you're building a lot of health anyway. And tanks in general can benefit from Last Stand a lot more. But again, it's 5 to 11% bonus damage. And that 5 to 11% actually depends on how much health you have lost. So if you lose 40% health, so if you go to the 60% HP, if you go to 60% HP, you get 5% bonus damage. And I can't remember exactly how it goes, but it might be something like 55% damage health, you get 6% damage, 50% health, you get 7% damage, and you get the idea. So the more health you lose, the more bonus adaptive damage you get. But it's a lot better to just go for Coup de Grace and just deal more damage to enemy champions, rather than you relying on you being low on HP for you to deal damage. That makes sense. Then we have Resolve Tree. By far the strongest tree. It does really have some dog shit runes in it. Like Loyalty, as you can see, the only deity rune, which I don't know how the fuck Loyalty is still in this game. I'll be totally honest. We've had 2 or 3 years of this terrible rune, and it's never been changed, and It's never been in the game. I don't know. It's really weird. Anyway, Resolve Tree, Second Wind and Nullifying Orb. My God, there are so many strong runes in this tree. Second Wind is incredible. Every single top laner takes this rune most of the time. I cannot think of a top laner that would not take this rune. In general, right now, bruisers in the top lane go for Resolve Tree, and then they go for Brutal. Tanks go for, obviously, the Resolve Tree with Second Wind, and then something else to benefit them. Even supports, even tank supports go for Second Wind, because if they are getting poked in the early game by enchanters, you heal so much health as a melee champion with Second Wind, and it can also stack on top of some passives. So like Nasa's passive, Garen passive. The healing from Garen passive stacks on top of Second Wind's passive. So you're just getting so much healing during the laning phase, and it just allows you to stay in the lane much longer. You can walk in, do some quick trades, walk away, get healing with Second Wind, and hey, you got a benefit already, and you can go back in and trade again. So yeah, Second Wind, very powerful melee champions, extremely powerful, probably the strongest rune on melee champions. Range champions, not as much, but it can still give you a little bit of benefit. Nullifying Orb as well, basically giving you a shield when you drop low on HP. This will bait a lot of enemies, and you'll see that they're going to be flashing in, they're going to be doing a bunch of burst damage and trying to kill you. Then the Nullifying Orb shield is going to surprise them, and then they're not able to kill you in the end. Very reliable rune. You don't need to do anything. Basically, you drop low on HP, you gain a shield to allow you to survive longer. Great, brilliant. Overgrowth, very, very powerful in the jungle, especially if you're playing bruisers or tanks. Even assassins take overgrowth now, since sudden impact got nerfed. Not a lot of assassins take sudden impact now, so you just go for overgrowth instead. It's just free HP, free survivability, free HP. If you're playing junglers that can clear through the jungle camps very, very quickly, it's so nice. As you can see there, when you kill one monster, you gain 3 permanent health, and then you gain 3% maximum health upon reaching 30 stacks. So you kill 30 jungle camps, you gain 3% maximum health, which might not seem like a lot, but it makes a huge difference to assassins and bruisers and even tanks that can benefit a lot throughout the game. Bone plating, very good against any sort of burst damage, any sort of quick trades that might happen, especially really good for AD carries that need that survivability. Maybe there's some assassins that need survivability, or even top lane champions as well. Any champions that you feel like you need some survivability, mages is also another good option as well, because you're maybe playing some champions that don't have a lot of mobility, and you're kind of standing there using your abilities, hope that you don't get jumped on. If you do get jumped on, if you do take a lot of damage, then Bone Plate is there to help you out and protect you. Perseverance is also great. The main reason why Perseverance is higher than Legend Tenacity is the extra armor and mag resist that you're able to get once you get CC'd. It's very, very strong. And also, it refreshes the duration every single time you are immobilized by a different ability. So basically, every single time you're CC'd, you gain tenacity already, which is great. Like flat tenacity is always great, so you don't have to do too much. And if you do get hit by crowd control, you gain 16 to 30 armor and mag resist. So if enemy champions engage on you, you're gaining more armor and mag resist to have that more survivability. So overall, an incredible rune. Very, very good. Courage and Colossus and Font to Life are maybe not as strong, but there's still some scenarios where this can be strong. Font to Life, especially on when you're playing bot lane, if you can proc Font of Life and your ADC can follow up by auto attacking, you both gain a little bit of healing and a little bit of extra, just a little bit of extra healing. You can trigger this by yourself, so you can use this on, I don't know, Ornn, for example, land your Q, follow up with your E and auto attack, and you still get a bit of extra healing. But the self heal is not as strong as the team heal, so you get more benefit if you use this in the bot lane, and you can use this again to just try and give your team a bit of healing, more survivability. Courage of Colossus, if you have a lot of crowd control, this is a great option. Gives you that bit of shielding, especially during the laning phase, which is great. And it also scales really well, depending on your maximum mana. So really good on tanks that has a lot of crowd control. Ornn, Shen, I was going to say Malphite, but not really, because you just have your ultimate. Basically any tanks that have crowd control, it can work great. Revitalize is nice if you're playing enchanter supports, but outside of that, the rune is not really beneficial to you at all. You only want to use this on enchanter supports, and even then, enchanter supports would much rather right now take things like Perseverance and Overgrowth to give them more survivability, because they already have so much healing and shielding in their kit, and they don't need the extra amplification. Onslaught is just a weaker version of Perseverance. These are actually in different rows in the rune tree. I believe Onslaught is in the first tree, which is the same as like Nullifying Orb and Courage of Colossus, I believe. I can't remember. Maybe it's in the second row. I can't remember off the top of my head. But in general, Onslaught is not as strong as Perseverance, again, because it doesn't give you the extra armor and mag resist when you get hit by any sort of crowd control. The downside of Onslaught as well is that it's very difficult because you need to stand close to close to champions to be able to gain the bonus tenacity, because you're only gaining 5% tenacity plus up to 20% bonus tenacity based on number of surviving enemy champions nearby. So you have to be close to enemy champions to gain up to 20% tenacity. And I've tested this as well, and the range is very, very short. So you have to be basically on top of them to gain 20% tenacity. So most of the time, you're only gaining 5%. So that's why also it's weaker, because Perseverance, you gain 10% instead. And do I need to say anything about loyalty? This rune is hot garbage. It's been garbage for the past 2 years. No one takes this rune. It's terrible. Yeah, when are they going to delete it? That's the only question at this point. When are they going to delete it? When are they going to bring it in for another new rune? I do not know. The only champion in the entire game that would take this rune is Yuumi, and that means that Yuumi will just, whoever Yuumi sits on, whoever Yuumi jumps on, gains the bonus armor and mag resist. But then again, you don't benefit from the armor and mag resist anyway, so it's just a terrible rune. I don't know why this rune is still in the game, but yeah, it still is. Anyway, that's it. That's my rundown of the runes for Wild Rift in 2025 and patch 6.0. If you have any opinions on the runes, or maybe you want to, you know, say, let your opinion be heard, or if you have any opinions on the tier list, maybe you feel like a rune should be moving up, a rune should be moving down, let me know down in the comments. I always read through all the comments and I reply to the comments as well. If there are any questions about the runes as well, please do let me know. Yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this type of content. Make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you all in the next Wild Rift video. Peace.